Hey guys, welcome back to another episode 31 of the Big Bros podcast. My name is Ilan and I'm joined by my lovely friend and co-host Jeremiah Twissia.
Jeremiah, alrighty. What's happening, mate? How you been?
We don't talk about it. How have you been?
Well, I have been ecstatic, mate. You know, coming off a Baggers win on the weekend into a preliminary final. Mate, I'm going to get tears of happiness if I start going on about the pure elation I felt on the MCG on Friday night. It is something that I've never experienced as a Carlton fan. And I mentioned the Sydney Swans victory last week, but boy, oh boy, was this something else. It was just atmospheric, you know, high-fiving random people all around me. It was just pure, deep emotion, pure, deep happiness. And look, I do send my condolences to you and the wider Demon Army, but you've experienced your success. It's time for ours, mate. And those lids are well and truly staying off. I can guarantee you that.
Well, two things. First of all, put those lids on because Zach Bailey, Charlie Cameron, Joe Danaher, and the rest of the Fitzroy Lions squad are going to have an absolute field day with you. Number two, no, Melbourne, we needed more than one premiership with this, you know, talented generational list. So I'll continue to be grumpy and I'll continue to be upset at our lack of achievement. But, you know, bad kicking is bad football, as good old, what's his face once said,
Rex Hunt, maybe?
Yeah. Maybe, Rex Hunt. I'm glad you mentioned him because couldn't get the name. But that begs the question. I wanted to leave because all the lids were off and they were out, but I was self-aware of my feelings.
Yeah.
Right? So what a crappy segue, but a useful one. So Jeremy, we're going to be talking about self-awareness today. We're going to be talking about the value of it, how being self-aware is almost like an antidote to living life on autopilot.
Yeah.
We'll also speak about the differences between being self-aware versus being self-conscious. We'll also speak about some little things we could do practically to improve our own self-awareness. So, without further ado, define what self-awareness is.
Yeah, well, I like how you compared it to self-consciousness there, because I think ultimately self-awareness is having conscious knowledge of your own character, including your thoughts, feelings, and emotions. So that's how I would describe self-awareness. And, you know, if I'm thinking about football, it's at times not being a Levi Casbolt. You know, it's being aware of what is going on around you, because, you know, it takes me back to the old Carlton days in when we were playing the Western Bulldogs. Could have been back in maybe 2020 or 2021. You know, you're having a shot right on the goal square and you've got defenders all around you and you're unaware of them and you muck up. And I think that was a perfect example of how to not be self-aware. So let's not be that. Let's not be the Levi Casbolt in front of the Carlton goal square back in 2019, 2020. Let's be more like maybe like a Blake Acres, recognizing that you're there in the goal square and you should just go back and bang it in if you don't have much time left on the clock and you put the game to bed.
It's funny because I was just thinking that's like maybe potentially not even being self-aware, because imagine he hits the post. I was speaking to your dad before. He was saying, why not just go back, take your 30 seconds, slot the kick and win the game?
Yeah, you know what? But
it would have been a slow death for us as well.
It's true. But I think as humans, we're also adrenaline running creatures, and big boy Blake Acres would have been having plenty of that running through his veins. So I back him in, and I think he did us all proud. So talk to me about being self-conscious rather than self-aware, because we mentioned what self-awareness is, how we define it. What about self-consciousness? Because, you know, if I think about myself sometimes, and times where, you know, I've not felt like as confident in myself, or I'm worrying about maybe how I look or how I'm going to be perceived about people, I question, is that me being like self-aware, or is that me being self-conscious?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I liken self-awareness to being objective and looking at things very logically and seeing things without emotion. So seeing things for what they are rather than adding any extra emotional connotation to it. Whereas with self-consciousness, it's not that it's necessarily a bad thing. I think it's useful to have thoughts in the back of your head that prevent you from doing stupid things or saying stupid things, because, you know, still being conscious of how you're perceived by others is a very important thing, especially if you want to be liked by others. That said, though, self-consciousness can spiral away from self-awareness when more of your thinking is very emotion-focused and unrealistic. So I like to use this example of a bad haircut. So suppose you get a complete mare.
You're trying to say something, mate?
No, I like your haircut. But you clearly don't. But you're a pretty boy. You'll never be happy with your haircut, I reckon. But suppose you have a bad haircut. Someone who's got really self-conscious might tell themselves, I can't go outside today because people will see the awful mop job that is my hair, and they'll start to hate me. They'll start harassing me. They might even bully me because of my poor haircut. And then by them hating me, this will reinforce to me that I'm not a likable person. Now, compare that with someone who may very well have a bad haircut, but they're self-aware of it. And they say, look, the barber didn't do the best job, right? But you know what?
She'll be right.
She'll be right. I'll put a hat on it. It'll grow back. I'll style it. People
Chuck some muck in.
People might look at it and think, oh, it's poor haircut. But you know what? Will they care? No, because they care. Everyone's so concerned with their own life. That's the key difference, because one has a very objective view of the world, and that is being self-aware, whereas those who are self-conscious, you're going down this emotional rabbit hole. We spoke about it last week with catastrophizing. So I think that's the key difference, is if you find yourself in a situation where you're not sure whether you're being self-aware or self-conscious, it could be both, but the key distinguishing factor is your level of emotionality.
I like that. And I think you are bringing my insecurity to light, because if you are watching this on a visual platform, you will see that I have had a haircut and it's a lot shorter than usual. So I walked out of the barber, thinking, goodness gracious, this is quite outside of my comfort zone here. And yeah, I'm not going to lie, I chucked a hat on the rest of the day. But, I think once I actually spoke to others about it, they're like, it's fine, mate, whatever, it's just hair, it grows back. And it's true. But I think you're right. At that moment, I was definitely attaching emotion to it. And you're thinking, goodness, what are people going to think? They're going to see this. It's so different, rah, rah, rah. But you know what? It's just a haircut. And that's the objective case of the scenario. And you just crack on and move on. And it's not the worst thing in the world. So I like that notion of emotion versus what's objective. That's a nice way to distinguish it. What do you think else is a way in which we can maybe stop ourselves from being self-conscious as a person and turn that into self-awareness? Because we're all self-conscious about things. We're only human. We all have insecurities. So how can we change that narrative to make that become more self-aware rather than self-consciousness?
I think it's asking yourself, I think sometimes if we genuinely ask ourselves, are we putting mayo on this situation? Are we over-exaggerating the situation? Like, if we're being truly truthful with ourselves and we ask ourselves, is this purely a reflection of reality? Oftentimes we can usually catch ourselves, especially if we literally say it out loud. Because if, let's say
it might bring to light how ridiculous it might be sounding.
That's it. So if
it's true.
If you told me, oh, I hate my haircut, I can't go outside today.
Yeah.
I'd literally ask you, are you hearing yourself?
Yeah.
Do you hear
stupid.
the emotion? Well, yeah, it sounds a bit silly because you're thinking, surely you don't actually believe that. So I think sometimes just airing out what your insecurities are or what you're self-conscious about can be a really helpful thing. That said, though, I'm not going to obviously minimize. There's some people who deal with a lot of difficult and challenging thoughts and emotions, and I'm not going to just say simply, oh, just vocalize it out loud. That'll solve all your self-conscious behaviors. I think the best remedy for self-conscious behaviors or being, in that self-conscious mindset is doing things that increase your self-love. So definitely tune into our episode from a few months ago. I think it was episode 12 where we spoke about how to increase self-love. And the best things to do to increase self-love is to do things that are hard for you, that bring out the best qualities in you. So being self-conscious isn't necessarily a bad thing. Suppose you're not happy with how you look, or you're unhappy with your body shape and you want to get bigger and stronger. Well, I'm not going to sit here and tell you, well, you know what, you should tell yourself that you look amazing the way you are. Well, you're a good person, of course, you're great the way you are. But if you feel like there is something you can improve in, let that self-consciousness drive you. Why not? I mean,
exactly.
You can disagree with me and that's all well and good, but I think that self-consciousness can be a really powerful motivator. You look at a lot of the people who undergo the best bodily transformations. They were clearly unhappy with themselves and self-conscious, and they used and channeled that energy in a really healthy way.
Yeah, it's a great example. And we mentioned voicing it, and we said, how sometimes it might sound futile when you voice things, but it can also be the opposite. If it is something that is maybe a little bit more severe, or maybe severe is not the right word, but if it's not just about a bad haircut, if it's something about your character or your appearance that you well and truly do want to change, maybe voicing that or putting that on paper is a way to bring that to light and to make you actually become self-aware of what you're self-conscious about. So it's actually taking the two and forming a marriage between self-awareness and being self-conscious, and forming a goal plan as to how you're going to action that and put that into, whether it is a behavioral change or a perspective change, to actually change what it is that you want to change, right? So it's bringing self-awareness and self-consciousness together and having a positive approach to the both of them.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that I think that's probably the best kind of marker of being self-aware is you can be self-aware about your own self-consciousness. And I think that's really, really powerful, because then you can at least identify things that trigger you, things that bother you, things that, you're good at. Overall, just your thoughts, values, and judgments, which is a good segue for the other point, which is why would you want to be self-aware? Sounds obvious, but I think a lot of the behaviors and habits that we perform on a day-to-day basis is purely done on autopilot. Because as humans, we want to try and conserve as much energy as we can. That's why we do things in default mode. We don't really want to think about why we do the things that we do. And it can be more efficient. We don't think about sometimes why we eat the foods that we do. We don't think about why we
say sometimes,
what we say, our language that we speak to ourselves, our, the self-affirming beliefs, our values. It's very rare that we can sometimes sit down consciously with our own thoughts and beliefs and actually say, why do I think what I do and what is the reasons behind this? And the inability to do that ultimately means that you say things that you're not really even conscious of, and you live life in a very almost like sleepwalking way. You're sleepwalking through life, and you don't necessarily have much conscious intent behind what you do.
Yeah.
And that usually leads to living in a blissful state of ignorance, where, it's sometimes, living in, blissful ignorance.
Yeah.
There's definitely kind of has its moments. Like, you don't want to know the exact moment and day you're going to die. That could fill you with a lot of paranoia. But at the same time, being aware that you're going to pass away one day, although you might not know the exact...
This is taking a turn,
I know,
mate.
I'm becoming very philosophical, but knowing that you're going to die one day can fill you with a lot of urgency to do things in your life that you need and want to get done. So I think that if you're more self-aware, you're less likely to be living in a blissful, ignorant state.
Yeah.
Because, and another really key thing is people who often live in like a very blissful... living by the notion of ignorance is bliss.
Yeah.
Oftentimes they'll have a lot of, uncomfortable thoughts that they don't want to approach or they want to address. And what they're doing there is sacrificing short-term discomfort for long-term, or rather sacrificing short-term discomfort for long-term comfort.
Yeah.
And I think that speaks more to people's like inability to address, things that are quite pertinent, things that
need to be brought to the surface.
Yeah. So I think that's why that more so speaks to the value of why being self-aware can be really helpful in that aspect.
And I think it's also really helpful because as someone with a friendship group or whatever, people want to be around people that are aware and sure of themselves. No one wants to be hanging around someone that is really indecisive or is really self-conscious. Like if you've got, I'm sure we've all got maybe a friend or someone we can think of that might always be bringing things to light or speaking things out loud that maybe just bring them down, like, oh, I don't like how I look today. My hair looks ugly. I look so bad when I wear this. And no one wants to be around someone that is constantly bringing those things to light and bringing self-conscious thoughts to the conversation that might not even be true. And it's just kind of verbal diarrhea. People want to be around people that are self-aware, that are confident in what they say, that can be decisive in what they do and how they act. So I think being self-aware for yourself will naturally make others want to be around you and probably make them become more self-aware as people too, because if they see that you're acting in a way that is quite decisive and quite switched on, that's ultimately it's a likable characteristic, and it's a likable trait which would, encourage other people to want to act the same way.
Yeah, well, I think the ancient Greeks talked a lot about the benefits of being self-aware. I think it's always been a very noble characteristic, because there is nothing more, I'd say, important in life than having a life full of meaning. And the way you can do that is by being aware of what your behaviors are. So to go into a little bit more detail about that, in relationships, self-awareness is so crucial. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because obviously it's like a prominent thing that we'll all be going through. But if you're not self-aware of your own needs in a relationship, that can usually be a massive or major predictor of a relationship breakdown.
Like boundaries.
Yeah, boundaries, what you want, what you don't like, what you do like. However, oftentimes, even knowing what we want is difficult in and of itself.
Yeah.
But even if we do know what we want, like on a maybe a subconscious level, we sometimes don't want to talk about it because we're almost afraid that the partner we're with may not fulfill that. And then that brings that whole conversation in your head of, is this partner that I'm with actually right for me? Because you're now asking yourself, I'm being self-aware of my needs, and is my partner going to be able to fulfill those needs? But I'd argue and challenge that point. I'd say that by being aware of your own emotional needs, suppose it's quality time, suppose that you really value and you are self-aware that one of your needs is having more quality time. It's your love language, right?
Yeah. You
can at least communicate that to your partner and say, look, I really love when we spend more time together. Is this something we can do more together, or something like that? That's essentially just a very simplistic example where you can be aware of what you want, ask for it, because there's nothing wrong with asking for what you want, and don't let anyone, tell you otherwise. But that's just like a really clear example. Decision making, we said it before. If you know in your heart of hearts that there's something that you want to do, and one of your values is telling you to do that. For example, you'll say you're working at a job, but you're really loyal to this company. They've done a lot of things for you. And this is just a completely like abstract example, but you're a very loyal person, and parts of your decisions are informed by your levels of loyalty.
Yeah.
Say you get a really lucrative job offer somewhere else that's like a rival. You might be in a really indecisive state naturally, because this new job might be offering you cash. It might be offering you new perks that's not really offered to you at your current job. But suppose you're a really loyal person and that trumps everything else, your decision making is going to be far more easier and practical, because you at least are governed by the value of loyalty. Yeah,
definitely. And I think if we aren't aware of what we want, because sometimes we actually don't know what we want, right? And if we use that job example there, like you might not know what you actually want in that scenario. So good to voice that to people and to ask them for their opinion of what they think is probably best for you, because the ones closest to you, whether it is your family or your best friends, they can really be valuable in helping you recognize what it is that is important potentially for you, or what is good for you rather. And that can bring into light further down the line values and characteristics that can make you more self-aware as a person. Because sometimes like I don't know what I want, and sometimes I might be indecisive about things, even if it's something simply as like deciding where to go to dinner, right? Sometimes it's great to get input from others, but ultimately we will need to make the decision for ourselves. So getting that insight from others can be really good to action us, to make us more self-aware and decisive down the line, because ultimately we do want to become self-aware people. We do want to become independent, decisive people.
Well, here's a quick solution for you for those dinner plans. Suppose you are, indecisive about two places, and one, you want to try out this new place.
Yeah.
It could go really well, or it might not go as well.
Yeah.
Or you just stick to what you like already. You're going to get something good.
That's being self-aware.
That's being self-aware. But say one of your values is being really open to new experiences and adventures, and that might mean trying new foods and whatever, and having that experience.
Then do that too.
That value in and of itself is now governing you, because you're self-aware. Okay, on some level, I understand I want to be a bit more adventurous. So therefore, let me try out this new food place, because it's probably going to at least be in line with my values. Sounds very philosophical for deciding where you want to get dinner on a Saturday night, but my point stands.
Literally. No, it's a great point you make. And I also think becoming more aware of yourself makes you also become aware of other people and aware of how you respond to other people. Because, when we're in tune of how we are behaving or how we would respond to certain situations, we can kind of preempt what is going to happen in some scenarios, right? So say you can kind of feel like an argument might be brewing between you and someone, and they're saying certain things and you're saying certain things, and you're going back and forth, having a verbal disagreement and an argument with one another. If you're a really self-aware person, you can get really good really quickly at preempting which road that verbal disagreement is going to go down. And you can get really good at putting a roadblock in front of that and stopping yourself from going down that pathway. And that's teaching us to become less reactive and therefore more in tune with, what we're actually saying and what we're actually feeling. And I think that is probably one of the most valuable things to friendship, relationship is your communication skills. And those communication skills can definitely be made way more valuable by becoming more self-aware, because ultimately you're just more aware of what you're saying and how you're talking to people. Because like you said earlier, talking and communication is something that we're so used to just doing on autopilot, and we're so used to just being governed by our flight or fight response, right? So becoming more self-aware teaches us to take a step back and actually think about what we're goddamn saying for once. And therefore, it's going to enable us to respond to people differently and respond to ourselves differently.
Agree completely. One thing that grinds my gears, though, is people sometimes use self-awareness as an excuse to continue bad behavior. So they'll be like, I know I'm, for example, they might, I don't know, they might swear a lot, right? And they swear, and then someone calls them out on it, but they say, no, look, I'm self-aware. I know I got to stop swearing, but I'm aware of it. I'm aware of it. Or suppose, someone who's like, let's just stick with the swearing example, because you can use that self-awareness as almost just like an excuse. It's because
excusing your behavior.
Yeah, excusing your behavior, because it's almost telling that other person, I know that it's bad, so I'm alluding to the fact that I'm actually going to do something about it. Whereas if you're not self-aware of it, it almost sounds like, well, this person didn't know any better. Yeah. And it's because as soon as you say like, oh, I'm aware of it, it almost comes out of like, just, I'm aware of it, hence I'm going to do something about it. Yeah. But a lot of times people, and look, I've done this myself, where it's like, I know I'm doing something, like procrastinating,
and you proceed to do it.
Yeah, I'll procrastinate. Yeah. I know I'm procrastinating. I'm aware of it, and then I'll justify it in my head, saying, well, it's good at least that I'm procrastinating. Well, that's the first step done. Great. You're self-aware. Self-awareness is just the preliminary action or thought or mindset that needs to precede some sort of valuable action or behavior.
Yeah, it's like saying to someone, no offense. I hate when people say no offense and then proceeding to offend, because that's what it implies. It's like, no offense, but you know what? Get ready, buckle up, because I'm going to proceed to offend you. So that is, you're right. It's being self-aware to a point where you don't really give a shit, and that's just called arrogance, really, is it not?
I don't know if it's arrogance, but like, how much worse does this sound? You look ugly today. No offense, but you look really ugly today. Yeah. I swear, if you put no offense before something, it's paradoxical, because it just sounds even worse.
Yeah, because you're recognizing it and you're trying to like kind of lighten it, but because you're kind of sugarcoating it, it actually makes it worse, because they're being fake and not truthful. Yeah, like I would prefer someone to just say, you're looking a bit ugly today, mate, versus no offense, you look ugly, because it sounds like you're kind of pedestalizing yourself.
Far out. People are going to be listening to this, and all they're going to be thinking is, God, these are the most superficial young males I've ever heard speak. All they talk about is bad haircuts, looking ugly, and
D's versus blues.
Correct.
But anyways, talk to me about how we can become more self-aware, because these are all great tips to actually, take forward and do. But, if, like I said earlier, I'm a little bit self-conscious, or I don't really feel like I'm that sure of myself, what can I do that's maybe like an easy way to start the process of becoming more self-aware?
Oh, I mean, we can go down a whole rabbit hole of knowing what your true values and core beliefs are. But
mate, I want some easy, quick fixes.
Okay, no. Why does everything have to be an easy fix? Why can't things take time? Why can't
Well,
things
time, but something that will at least stimulate.
Okay, fine. You want to start learning how? For God's sakes, I'm the registered psychologist on this show with no qualification. So no, I'm not a psychologist, guys. But something that I've actually, I'm not ashamed to say it. Something that I've done before. This part actually, I'll start with what I'm least ashamed with.
Go for it.
But if I just want to train my ability to be focused, I do mindfulness.
Yeah.
I don't do mindfulness meditation, but I'll in the traditional sense, but I'll literally just sit down, or maybe it is mindfulness meditation, but I'll literally close my eyes and I'll just start body scanning. I'll start going from my feet, being like, what does it feel like when my feet are touching the ground? What does it feel like with my back against the floor? What does my head feel like? Is there any tightness? But I do it in a really non-judgmental way and almost like an objective way whilst concentrating on my breath work. What's that doing? What that is literally doing is getting you to not think about the past or the future, but it's getting you to think about the present moment. As soon as you start thinking about the present moment, that's almost inextricably linked with just being more self-aware.
Literally.
So that's something that's really helped.
And I think that's also transferable to other situations. Like if we bring back to light the situation where you might be involved in a verbal disagreement with someone, when you're there, if you've been practicing mindfulness, you might be more inclined to actually be present in that moment and think about what you're saying and what you're feeling.
Oh, 100%. You might be like, look, I know you and I are a bit, our conversation's a bit tense right now. Let's just remove ourselves from here for 5 minutes, cool down, and come back and speak in a more logical way.
Yeah.
Someone who's mindful is self-aware.
Literally.
So I think that's something that's definitely helped me. Now, I said I was ashamed to do it, but that's actually incorrect. I've done it a couple times. It's not something I've been ashamed of, but literally just writing down on a piece of paper what my true values are is such a cool thing to do. And asking yourself why... if you write down all the behaviors you do in a day and then see if there's a trend over a week, you automatically kind of become aware of why you do the things that you do or what you do. Then you can start asking yourself and you can literally write it down, start brainstorming. You're analyzing yourself. You're literally getting a microscope and putting it over you. You start looking at, okay, well, I've done X, Y, and Z. I decided to eat junk food on a day that I didn't want to eat junk food. Why did I want to eat junk food on that day? Oh, was it because I was stressed with an assignment? So is it potentially that I was stress eating that day and that was the reason? Okay, well, what does that say about my coping mechanisms? Are my coping mechanisms ones that are almost maladaptive? Am I trying to put myself into comfort food as a way of distracting myself from the discomfort of a stressful assignment? You do that with, for example, any of your behaviors and you start becoming aware of your triggers and almost those roadblocks, those little hurdles. Have you ever played Mario Kart and you get those banana peels? Yeah, you become aware of those.
Yeah.
So I think that's really cool. And then you do that for a couple of weeks, 2-3 weeks. You get a really good understanding and a sample of your behaviors and some of your common triggers. But the cool thing is you also get an idea of what you're really good at and your strengths. And there's nothing cooler than setting a goal and knowing that you have strengths that you can employ that will achieve that.
I think that's excellent, mate, and nothing to be shameful of. I think, sometimes we maybe just... I understand why you said you might feel a bit of shame in saying those things, because it sounds a little bit silly almost to think, I'm going to write down on paper why I'm doing something or why I'm feeling something. Because, oftentimes we're just inclined to really keep it all in our minds, right? But if we have that piece of paper in front of us and writing it down on there can really start to actually give us that visual picture of what is going on in our lives. So I think that's really good, and it's a really great way to action that behavior change.
Let me ask you though, what do you do when you want to become a bit more self-aware?
I like to... So I'm probably not a visual person like that. I probably don't write it out on paper. It's a great thing that I probably should start doing. But what I like to do is just talk to those around me, talk to them about my behaviors, whether it is, positive or negative behaviors, talk to my best mates about it, talk to my family about it, whoever it might be. Voicing it out is that way where I can really just actualize what I'm feeling and what I'm saying. And that's a really good way that I can then actualize that behavior change and that pathway forward.
That's perfect. I really, really like that because it shows that everyone's got different methods of dealing with things and actually becoming more self-aware. Because I think there are so many ways you can become self-aware. Life will generally tell you as well. you'll go through trials and tribulations, and you'll learn a lot of things of how much you can tolerate, how you transcended difficulties. So becoming self-aware is a ongoing journey throughout life. I like that you mentioned the whole thing about speaking to those who are closest around you, because when you do speak to those around you, they'll affirm a lot of things that you on a deeper level know, but sometimes are too afraid to admit. And having that nudge is so important.
Exactly. And yeah, just, you're right. You're bringing to light something that you might already know is deep inside of you, but having that person listen and then maybe reinforce that to you gives you that confidence that maybe your true feelings are right. And if they're wrong, and if the person disagrees, then maybe that's also, and definitely I actually reckon is a positive thing as well, because then you're going to probably start to action a behavior change together with them rather than just doing it on your own, because sometimes it is scary to make those behavior changes on our own. So if we can have someone there to hold ourselves accountable to it, then we're going to come out the better for it on a personal level. And it's also going to enhance our relationship with them ultimately.
And by the same token, also make sure that if you truly believe something about yourself and you're aware of these thoughts and feelings and values, even those closest around you, don't let them convince you otherwise. Because at the end of the day, sure, you might yield a lot of benefits from speaking to others, but you are your own person and you do have the responsibility of knowing what you want, and no one else can tell you otherwise. You know, you can ask them what they think, but that shouldn't ever overshadow what you truly want, and you shouldn't convince yourself out of believing it just because someone else said something. On that note, we're going to wrap it up. Key points to remember here is that just being self-aware will reduce living life on autopilot. You might ask, is it that bad living life on autopilot? Well, it's probably not the best, because life is short. You're better off maximizing the meaning you derive from it.
We want to be intentional, don't we?
You want to be intentional. You want to make sure that the things you do are fulfilling and they actually fill your cup. Being self-aware is a good thing, because it's often the first step that will actually precede any form of behavior change, because it's going to be that first blueprint. And reality is there's no step to change without knowing why you're changing. So on that note, I hope Carlton get absolutely smacked and GWS come through. I hope Jesse Hogan kicks a bag and Toby Bedford kicks the Collingwood Magpies out of the finals, and it's a GWS flag.
Happy Tuesday, everyone.
Happy Tuesday.
Go Blues.